about 60 miles long and 18 miles wide at its widest point. It was defended by 110,000 Japanese who had excavated and fortified elaborate caves, tunnels, and casemates concealing a deadly accumulation of artillery. At the time Sledge's battalion was in reserve. It still had to land on the beach at D-Day, April 1st, 1985. Driving down the landing pit, Sledge was still frightened, although having been through hell, not as frightened as but this time it proved little reasonable. The landing was virtually level, and its soldiers and marines, who were expected to be numbers without a minute, made it ashore smiling and very simple. Water-filled holes and slippery ridges, looking like Verdun in the Great War. Long stay in a muddy hole on Half Moon Ridge near Shuri, the main Japanese point of resistance, almost drove Sledge insane. There he existed in an atmosphere of unburied, stinking Japanese and Marine corpses, maggots, flies, rain, dysentery, knee-deep mud, and the constant fear of death at any moment. The most ghastly corner of hell I had ever witnessed, Sledge writes. Few had been bad, but this was an environment so degrading I believed we had been flung into hell's own cesspool. To slip in the mud and fall was to have one's clothing filled with wriggling maggots from the rotting corpses. And if a Marine slipped and slid down the back slope of the muddy ridge, he was apt to reach the bottom, vomiting. War for Sledge and the others fighting in conditions like this was insanity, and some Marines went insane, reduced by the shelling to crying or mad shouting and screaming. Were removed from the line suffering from malaria or pneumonia. Those with trench foot stayed put. Japanese, finally driven out of their Shuri positions, withdrew further south to a last-stand defense at Kunishi Ridge, where, as usual, they occupied deep caves largely resistant to artillery, aerial bombing, and naval gunfire. Despite hopes for some respite, Sledge's company had to continue with its dreadful work, and sensing that his luck was running out, one can't expect to beat the terrible odds forever, Sledge was in a near panic. But he did not break. When his battalion finally reached the southern shore of the island, Company K was down to 50 men. The mission of Okinawa had taken 82 days. First Class Eugene Sledge had lost 25 pounds, and on his hands and arms were open sores that would not heal for months. But a final indignity. His battalion had to now move north again, burying the blackened Japanese corpses and salvaging brass shell cases. American casualties on Okinawa came to almost 40,000. There were also more than 26,000 neuropsychiatric cases, then evacuated after psychological breakdowns. In addition to the destruction of the Japanese defenders, some 42,000 Okinawan civilians were killed. Knowing all too well what the forthcoming invasion of Japan would mean for them, Sledge and the lucky survivors in his outfit heard the news of the A-bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with an indescribable sense of relief. Live, even if shaken and illuminated for a lifetime without the depth of human iniquity. Sledge's testimony about these almost incredible events is entirely credible because of his evident decency and his remoteness from any sort of disingenuousness, actual or literary. The way both with life and language is straight, without irony, hyperbole, or the desire to show off. If another writer asserted that in the shower he had seen a long-time member of the Old Breed, Gunnery Sergeant St. Elmo M. Haney, briskly scrubbing his genital organs with a GI brush, we might disbelieve. Sledge tells us this, we know it is true. Veterans of front lines everywhere will applaud the accuracy with which Sledge registers the sights and sounds of combat. And screen readers are likely to assert that bullets whine. Sledge knows that they snap. Artillery shells that whine, while mortar shells whisper faintly. So remarkably accurate is Sledge's memory of physical details. He recalls exactly what it's like to hike with a heavy pack in a long column that frequently and inexplicably stops. The man put down his load, he was sure to hear, "Pick up your gear, we're moving out." The column paused, each man was faced with what Sledge calls, without irony, a big decision. Decision in every man's mind at each pause in the column's forward progress was whether to drop his load and hope for a lengthy pause, or to stand there and support all the weight rather than putting it down and having to pick it up again right away. Sledge's precise description and honest narration accommodate without apology or ex post facto self-consciousness his boyish pride in being a Marine and helping to win the war, as well as his natural disdain for those in the rear so unimaginative as not to be able to understand what the line troops go through. Leslie Hero worships his company's skipper, Captain Haldane, and he honestly reports his sobs when he hears that Haldane has been killed, and he still mourns for him after all these years. Sharp eye for evidence of nobility and courage in others prompts him to celebrate the selfless dedication of the corpsman. His sense of honor obliges him to keep his promises, even apparently trivial ones. His book indicates the way he has been true to his wartime experience. He has not allowed the passage of time or subsequent political history to soften the cruel outlines of an experience he must not euphemize or forget. After 15 days of fighting on Penalty, Sledge was finally overcome by the strain. I felt myself choking up. I slowly turned my back to the men facing me as I sat on my helmet and put my face in my hands to try to shut out reality. And sobbing, my body shuddered and shook. What occasioned this outburst is less Sledge's own fear than his pity for others. He has just heard of a severely wounded Marine nearby, whose body, lifted onto a litter, came apart. Sickened and revolted to see healthy young men get hurt and killed day after day, I felt I couldn't take any more. This extraordinary compassion that makes Sledge so unique a memoirist of war. One expects an infantryman or Marine to feel fear and pity for himself, but it is rare for a soldier to be distraught because he feels for others, total strangers often, and to be distraught without a trace of sentimental affectation or secret self-congratulation. For this reason, Sledge doubtless suffered more than many of his fellow Marines, and he has not notably hardened since. "I'd like to watch television shows with violence in them," he says today. A poem he likes to quote comes from the First World War, but he knows it will serve for the Second and subsequent wars as well. It is Wilfred Owen's Insensibility, Owen's ironic celebration of men devoid of compassion and imagination, whose experiences in war are easier and more forgettable than those of their sensitive comrades. They are men who yet, before they are killed, can let their veins run cold, whom no compassion fleers or makes their feet sore on the alleys cobbled with their brothers. They are those who lose imagination. They have enough to carry with ammunition. Be the soldier home, with not a notion how somewhere, every dawn, some men attack. Cursed are dullards whom no cannon stuns. By choice they made themselves immune to pity. It was Sledge's fine sensibility that caused him to suffer more than some. It is that same sensibility that in this book has kept the distinctions firm, the compassion warm, the imagination agile, and the values admirable. Possible.
1. The neglected battle. Chapter 1. Being of a Marine. Enlisted in the Marine Corps on 3 December 1942 at Marion, Alabama. At the time I was a freshman at Marion Military Institute. My parents and brother Edward had urged me to stay in college as long as possible in order to qualify for a commission in some technical branch of the U.S. Army. But, prompted by a deep feeling of uneasiness that the war might end before I could get overseas into combat, I wanted to enlist in the Marine Corps as soon as possible. A Citadel graduate and a second lieutenant in the Army suggested life would be more beautiful for me as an officer. Mother and father were mildly distraught at the thought of me in the Marines as an enlisted man, that is, cannon fodder. The Marine recruiting team came to Marion Institute, not compromised, and signed up for one of the Corps' new officer training programs. It was called B-12. Recruiting sergeant wore dress blue trousers, a khaki shirt, necktie, and a barracks hat. Shoes had a shine, the likes of which I'd never seen. Asked me lots of questions and filled out numerous official papers. When he asked any scars, birthmarks, or other unusual features, I described an inch-long scar on my right knee. So why such a question? He replied, "It can identify you on some Pacific beach after the jets blast off your dog tags." It was my introduction to the stark realism that characterized the Marine Corps. I later came to know. College year ended the last week of May 1943. The month of June at home in Mobile before I had to report 1 July for duty at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. Enjoyed the train trip from Mobile to Atlanta because the train had a steam engine. It smelled good. The whistle added a plaintive note reminiscent of an unhurried life. Porters were impressed and most solicitous when I told them, with no little pride, that I was on my way to becoming a Marine. Official Marine Corps meal ticket got me a large, delicious shrimp salad in the dining car, and the admiring glances of the steward in attendance. Arrival in Atlanta, a taxi deposited me at Georgia Tech, where the 180-man Marine detachment lived, in Harrison Dormitory. Kids were scheduled to attend classes year-round, in my case about 2 years. Graduate, go to the Marine base at Quantico, Virginia, for officers training. Being regular, Captain Donald Pizant was in charge. Served with the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal. Seeming to glory in his duty and his job as our commander, he loved the Corps and was salty, full of swagger. In fact, I realize now that he had survived the meat grinder of combat and was simply glad to be in one piece. The good fortune of being stationed at a peaceful college campus. Georgia Tech was easy and comfortable. Or we didn't know there was a war going on. The college courses were dull and uninspiring. Many of the professors openly resented our presence. All but felt we had joined the Marines to fight. We were college boys again. The situation was more than many of us could stand. At the end of the first semester, 90 of us, half of the detachment, flunked out of school so we could go into the Corps as enlisted men. Navy officer in charge of academic affairs called me in to question me about my poor academic performance. I told him I hadn't joined the Marine Corps to sit out the war in college. Sympathetic to the point of being fatherly. And he said he would feel the same way if he were in my place. Pazant gave the 90 of us a pep talk in front of the dormitory the morning we were to board the train for boot camp at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, California. He told us we were the best men and the best Marines in the detachment. That he admired our spirit for wanting to get into the war. I think he was sincere. After the pep talk, buses took us to the railway station. Sang and cheered the whole way. We're on our way to war at last. We had only known what lay ahead of us. Approximately 2.5 years later, I came back through the Atlanta railway station on my way home. After I stepped off the car for a stroll, a young Army infantryman walked up to me and shook hands. He had noticed my 1st Marine Division patch and the campaign ribbons on my chest. I wondered if I had fought at Payload. That I had. He told me he just wanted to express his undying admiration for the men of the 1st Marine Division. I fought with the 81st Infantry Division, Wildcats, which had come in to help us at Payload. A machine gunner, been hit by Japanese fire on Bloody Nose Ridge, abandoned by his Army comrades. He would either die of his wounds or be cut by the Japanese when darkness fell. In their lives, some Marines had moved in and carried him to safety. The soldier said he was so impressed by the bravery, efficiency, and esprit of the Marines he saw on Payload, or to thank every veteran of the 1st Marine Division he ever ran across. Dago people, as those of us bound for San Diego were called, boarded a troop train in the big railroad terminal in Atlanta. Everyone was in high spirits, as though we were headed for a picnic instead of boot camp and a war. Across the country took several days and was uneventful but interesting. Most of us had never been west, and we enjoyed the scenery. The monotony of the trip was broken with card games, playing jokes on each other, and waving, yelling, and whistling at any and all women visible. Some meals and dining cars on the train, but at certain places the train moved into a siding, eating the restaurant and the railroad terminal. All of the rail traffic we passed was military. We saw long trains composed almost entirely of flat cars loaded with tanks, half-tracks, artillery pieces, trucks, or military equipment. Troop trains passed us going both ways. Some of them carried Army troops. Rail traffic impressed on us the enormousness of the nation's war effort. Arrived in San Diego early one morning. Collecting our gear, we fell into ranks outside our cars as the 1st sergeant came along and told the NCOs on our train which buses to get us aboard. 1st sergeant looked old to us teenagers. Like ourselves, he was dressed in a green wool Marine uniform, but he had campaign ribbons on his chest. So wore the green French fourragère on his left shoulder. As a member of the 5th Marine Regiment, I would wear the braided cord around my left arm with pride. This man sported, in addition, 2 single loops outside his arm. It meant he had served with a regiment, either the 5th or 6th Marines, that had received the award from France for distinguished combat service in World War I. Sergeant made a few brief remarks to us about the tough training we faced. He seemed friendly, passionate, almost fatherly. His manner threw us into a false sense of well-being and left us totally unprepared for the shock that awaited us when we got off those buses. Fall out and board your assigned buses, ordered the 1st sergeant. All right, you people. Get aboard them buses, the NCOs yelled. Seemed to have become more authoritarian as we approached San Diego. After a ride of only a few miles, the buses rolled to a stop at the big Marine Corps recruit depot, boot camp. I looked anxiously out the window. I saw many platoons of recruits marching along the streets. Each drill instructor, DI, bellowed his highly individual cadence. Recruits looked as rigid as sardines in a can. I grew nervous at seeing how serious, or rather scared, they seemed. Right, you people, off them damn buses. Rambled out, lined up with men from the other buses, and were counted off into groups of about 60. Trucks rolled by carrying work parties of men still in boot camp, or who had finished recently. Looked at us with knowing grins and jeered, "You'll be sorry." This was the standard, unofficial greeting extended to all recruits. Shortly after we debussed, a corporal walked over to my group. Yelled, "Platoon, ten up, right haste, forward hook, double time hook." He ran us up and down the streets for what seemed hours, and finally to a double line of huts that would house us for a time. Breathless. Didn't even seem to be breathing hard. "Dude, halt! Right haste!" Put his hands on his hips and looked us over contemptuously. "You people are stupid," he bellowed. Then on he tried to prove it every moment of every day. "My name is Corporal Doherty. I'm your drill instructor. This is Platoon 984. If any of you idiots think you don't need to follow my orders, just step right out here and I'll beat your ass right now. Your soul may belong to Jesus, but your ass belongs to the Marines. You people are recruits. You're not Marines. You may not have what it takes to be Marines." Don't dare move. Even to breathe. We're all humbled, because there was no doubt the DI meant exactly what he said. Doherty wasn't a large man by any standard. He was at about 5 feet 10 inches, probably around 160 pounds. He was muscular, with a protruding chest, flat stomach, thin lips, ruddy complexion. Probably as Irish as his name. His accent, I judged him to be a New Englander. Boston. That's were the coldest, meanest green I ever saw. There he was, like a wolf versus a person. Just to tear us apart. It gave me the impression that the only reason he didn't do so was that the Marine Corps wanted to use us as cannon fodder to absorb Japanese bullets and shrapnel, so genuine Marines would be spared to capture Japanese positions. Corporal Doherty was tough and hard as nails. None of us ever doubted. Their DIs yelled at them. Everything was straight up. Then he shouted in icy, menacing tones that sent cold chills through us. We believed that if he didn't scare us to death, the Japanese would kill us. He was in great need, and his uniform fitted him as if the finest tailor had made it. The posture was erect, bearing reflected military precision. Full of pictures of DI wearing sergeant stripes. Doherty commanded our respect, and put such fear into us that he couldn't have been more effective if he had had the 6 stripes of the first sergeant instead of the 2 on the corporal. The fact emerged immediately with stark clarity. This man would be the master of our fates in the weeks to come. We rarely drilled us on the main parade ground, but marched or double-timed us to an area near the beach of San Diego Bay. The deep, soft sand made walking exhausting. This would heal. For hours on end, days on end, drilled back and forth across the soft sand. Legs ached terribly. did those of everyone else in the platoon. Gentlemen that were not concentrated on fold, collar, or cap of the man in front of me, or tried to count the ships in the day. My muscles didn't ache as bad. Got out of ranks because of tired legs was what I'm thinking. The other remedy for such shirking was to double time in place to get the legs in shape. Being humiliated, great, from by the DI, I preferred the pain to the rapid. We're heading back to the HUD area at the end of each drill session. He would halt us, ask him in for his rifle, and tell us he would demonstrate the proper technique for holding the rifle while creeping and crawling. So, he would place the butt of the rifle on the sand, release the weapon, and let it drop. And if anyone did that, would have a miserable day. With so many men in the platoon, it was uncanny how often he has to use my rifle in this demonstration. After demonstrating how to cradle the rifle, he ordered us to creep and crawl. We, the men in front, kicked sand into the rifle behind him. This and several other techniques, the DI made it necessary for us to clean our rifles several times each day. We learned quickly and well that all Marine Corps troops, rifle as Marines, asked always treated it as just that. The first few days, Doherty once asked one of them to question about his rifle. That's right. The hapless recruit referred to his rifle as my gun. I muttered some instructions to him, and the recruit blushed. He began trotting up and down in front of the huts, holding his rifle in one hand and his penis in the other, chanting, "This is my rifle," as he held up his M1, "and this is my gun," as he moved his lever. "This is for Japs," he again held aloft his M1, "and this is for fun," he held up his other arm. Needless to say, none of us ever again used the word gun, unless referring to a shotgun, mortar, artillery piece, or naval. The day in boot camp began with reveille at over 100 hours. Tumbled out of our sacks in the chilly dark and hurried through shaves, dressing, and shouting. One day ended with taps of 2200. Any time between taps of rally, however, a DI might break us out for rifle inspection, close over drill, or for a run around the parade ground or over the sand by the bay. Seemingly cruel and senseless harassment stood me in good stead later. I found that war about moved to 2 or 3 different HUD areas during the first few weeks. Moments notice. There was platoon 984, all out on the double with rifles, full individual equipment, and sea bags with all gear properly sewn. There to move out in 10 minutes. And scramble would follow as men gathered up and packed their equipment. Man had 1 or 2 close buddies who pitched in to help each other on packs and hoist heavy sea bags on the set of shoulders. Several men from each hut would stay behind to clean up the huts and surrounding area, as the other men of the platoon struggled to deliver their heavy loads to the new hut area. On arrival at the new area, the platoon halted, received hut assignments, fell out, and stowed gear. As we got into the huts, we would get orders to fall in for a drill with rifles, cartridge belts, and bayonets. Some urgency and hurry never remained. The eye was ingenious in finding ways to harass us. The HUD areas we were in was across a high fence from an aircraft factory, where big B-24 Liberator bombers were made. It was an airstrip, too. Big 4-engine planes came and went low over the tops of the huts. Someone belly landed, going through the fence near our huts. No one was hurt, but several of us 2/3 of the way back, the front guy of Platoon 984. Today, while returning from the bayonet course, I had a step and couldn't pick up the cadence. Doherty marched along beside me. Icy tone, he said, "Boy, if you don't get in step and stay in step, I'll kick you so hard in the behind that they're gonna have to take both of us to sick bay. It'll take a major operation to get my foot out of your ass." Those inspiring words ringing in my ears, I picked up the cadence and never lost it again. It became quite chilly, particularly at night. Cover up with blankets and overcoat. We must have slept in dungaree trousers, sweatshirts, in addition to our skins. Well, he sounded well before daylight. We had to pull on our boondockers, field shoes, before falling in for roll call. Morning after roll call, we ran in the foggy darkness to a large asphalt parade ground for rifle calisthenics. Wooden platform. Muscular physical training instructor led several platoons in a long series of tiring exercises. The dress system played a scratchy recording of 3 o'clock in the morning. Supposed to keep time with the music. He was broken only by frequent whispered curses and insults directed at our enthusiastic instructor. The too frequent appearance of various DIs who stalked the extended ranks, making sure all hands exercised vigorously. Not only did the exercises harden our bodies, but our hearing became super keen from listening to the DIs as we skipped a beat or two early for rest in the inky darkness. At the time, we didn't realize or appreciate the fact that discipline, learning, and responding to orders under stress all that would mean the difference later in combat between success and failure, even when you're dying. Your training also proved to be an unscheduled interval, generally during sledge round. Then we received an order that we were going to move out to the rifle range. Read the announcement enthusiastically. We had it, and we would receive the traditional broad-brimmed campaign hats. Supply ran out when our turn came. We felt envious and cheated every time we saw those salty-looking Smoky Bear hats on the range. On the first morning at the rifle range, we began what was probably the most thorough and most effective rifle marksmanship training given to any troops of any nation during World War II. Divided into 2-man teams the first week of drop firing or snapping in. Concentrated on proper tactics, trigger speeds, calling of shots, use of the lever sling, shooting aid, and other maneuvers. It became obvious why we all received thick pads to be sewn into the buttons and right shoulders of our dungaree jackets. Snapping in, each man and his buddy practiced together. Proper position, standing, kneeling, sitting or prone, and squeezing the trigger. And the other pushing back the rifle bolt lever with the heel of his hand. By an empty off bandolier wrapped around the top. Procedure cocked the rifle and simulated recoil. The eyes and rifle coaches checked every man continuously. They had to be just so. Arms became sore from being contorted into various positions and having the leather sling straining our joints and biting into our muscles. We also had problems perfecting the sit position. I never saw use that combat. The coach helped out the way he did me, simply by plopping his weight on my shoulders until I was able to assume the correct position. Familiar with firearms, forgot what they did, and what the Marine Corps. Not only to accuracy but safety, its principles were pounded into us mercilessly. The piece pointed toward the target. Never pull your rifle at anything you don't intend to shoot. Check your rifle each time you pick it up to be sure it isn't loaded. Many accidents have occurred with unloaded rifles. And onto the firing line and received live ammunition the next week. first, the sound of rifles firing was disconcerting, but prolonged. Snapping in had been so thorough, we went through our paces automatically. We fired at round, black, bullseye targets from 100, 300, and 500 yards. Platoons worked the butts. When the range officer ordered, ready on the right, ready on the left, all ready on the firing line, commence firing, I felt as though the rifle was a part of me and vice versa.